I never thought my life would end up like this, standing alone in a beautiful home, surrounded by silence, yet feeling completely unseen. I was in my mid-40s, married, but lonelier than I had ever been. My husband was rarely home. His work kept him away for long stretches, days that turned into weeks, and even when he returned, it was as if only his body came back. His presence was distant, his touch long forgotten. We barely talked about anything real, and intimacy had disappeared from our marriage like it never existed. Still, I went through the motions. I cooked meals, cleaned the house, smiled for the neighbors. On the outside, everything looked fine. Inside, I felt like I was disappearing. When he told me he'd be gone again, this time for nearly a month, I said nothing. I had stopped asking questions long ago. A week after he left, my stepson Aiden came home for spring break. He was 22 now, tall, respectful, the quiet type. I had helped raise him since he was in middle school, and we had always kept a polite distance. But something about him felt different now. The way he looked at me, it wasn't inappropriate, not at first, but it lingered. His compliments felt warmer, more intentional. One morning in the kitchen, he looked at me and said, "You look beautiful today." I laughed it off, but my heart fluttered in a way I hadn't felt in years. We started spending more time together, grocery runs, cooking, watching shows late at night. It all seemed innocent, but the air between us changed. His arm would brush against mine, his presence closer than it used to be. One evening, as we watched the sunset on the porch, he told me he admired how I kept the family together, how strong I had been. His words hit something deep. I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen me like that. I looked at him and, for the first time, didn't see just my stepson. I saw a man, one who noticed me, who cared how I felt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything, his words, his smile, how I hadn't pulled away. I told myself it was just a phase, that I was just lonely. But it wasn't that simple. I had already crossed a line emotionally, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. The next morning, his presence made me nervous, but I also looked forward to it. I had started craving that feeling again. The attention, the warmth, the sensation of being truly seen. It scared me, because even though nothing had happened yet, I knew I was getting close to something I might not be able to undo. It all changed on a Thursday night. The rain came down hard, and the lights went out. The silence of the house grew heavier in the dark, the only glow coming from a few scattered candles. Aiden walked into the living room holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one and said softly, "Thought you could use this." I looked at him, heart racing, unsure of what would happen next. I never thought my life would reach this point, standing in a beautiful home, feeling like a ghost. In my mid-40s, I was married, but my husband was barely ever around. His work trips lasted for weeks, and when he came home, it felt like he was just checking in, not really returning. We barely spoke, let alone touched. The spark we once had was long gone, buried under years of silence and routine. I still kept up the appearance of a happy wife, cooking, cleaning, being polite to neighbors, but inside, I felt invisible. When he told me he'd be gone again for nearly a month, I smiled and nodded like I always did. I didn't argue. I never did. I had convinced myself this was normal. A week after he left, my stepson Aiden came home from college for spring break. He was 22 now, tall, polite, respectful. I had been in his life since he was a boy, so our bond was always calm and distant, shaped by quiet respect. But something had shifted. He looked at me differently. Not in a way that felt wrong at first, just more aware. His compliments were no longer casual, they lingered. One morning he told me I looked beautiful. I laughed, brushed it off, but something inside me stirred. We began spending more time together, cooking meals, watching TV, running errands. It all seemed innocent, but I noticed the way his hand would graze mine, how he stood just a little too close. One evening on the porch, he told me he admired how I kept everything together, how strong I was for the family. I hadn't heard words like that in years. Something in his voice broke through the quiet sadness I'd built around myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt noticed. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him, about how he looked at me, how I hadn't pulled away. I told myself it was nothing, just loneliness. But it wasn't just that. I had crossed a line emotionally, even if nothing physical had happened. I began to crave the way he made me feel seen. I was scared because I knew I was getting too close to something I might not be able to stop. Then came the night everything changed. It was raining heavily, and the power went out. The house was dark and quiet, lit only by a few candles. Aiden came into the living room with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you could use this," he said with a soft smile. I hesitated but took it. We sat together, listening to the rain, saying very little at first. Then the conversation turned deeper. He spoke about feeling lost, how being home gave him peace, how being near me felt safe. I listened, drawn to his openness. Then he said, "You don't even realize how incredible you are, do you?" I turned to him, confused, but he didn't look away. "You deserve someone who sees you. Someone who makes you feel alive." My heart was racing. I should have told him it was wrong. I should have stopped it. But I didn't. I let his words sink in. I told him sometimes I felt like I was fading in this house, like no one even noticed I was here. He reached for my hand and held it gently. I didn't pull away. His touch was warm, not pushy. It felt quiet, real, like something inevitable. He leaned in, slowly, and I let him kiss me. It was soft, full of emotions neither of us had spoken aloud. When it ended, I stood up, told him I needed to go to bed, and left the room without another word. But I didn't sleep. My mind raced. My heart was loud in my chest. What we had done, it was wrong. A betrayal, not just of my husband, but of everything I thought I believed in. Yet a part of me didn't regret it. A part of me felt alive again. Seen, touched. I had forgotten what that felt like. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something in me had shifted forever. The next morning, I moved through the kitchen pretending everything was normal, but nothing felt the same. Aiden came in calmly, his voice light as he offered to help with breakfast. I didn't meet his eyes. But I felt the weight of what had happened hanging silently in the air. A line had been crossed. And neither of us could go back. We never spoke of the kiss. Neither of us dared to bring it up, but it hung between us like a truth too loud to silence. I kept convincing myself it was just a moment, a brief lapse in judgment. But when his hand brushed mine again, I didn't move. When he stood close behind me to reach a plate, I felt my breath catch. Shame and excitement twisted inside me like a storm. Later that day, I caught him watching me. Not casually, but with focus, like every part of me mattered. I hadn't felt that in years. Not from my husband, not from anyone. It was wrong, and I knew it. But I still wanted more. Aiden began staying home more than going out. He found reasons to be around me, movie nights, running errands, long walks that stretched into deeper conversations. He asked me things no one had asked in a long time. About my childhood, my dreams, what I'd sacrificed over the years. Slowly, I realized how much of myself I had hidden away just to survive a marriage that gave me nothing in return. I tried to set boundaries. I told him we had to stop, that it was dangerous, reckless, selfish. He nodded. He apologized. But the next time we were alone, he whispered to me that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I deserved more than being forgotten by a man who didn't even notice when I cried myself to sleep. And somehow, every word from him felt like it was stitching me back together. One night, he reached out and touched my face. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said softly. "You're allowed to feel again." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The way I looked at him said everything. The emotional line we had crossed was long behind us now. What happened after that wasn't planned. It just happened. It felt inevitable, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. I had become a woman torn in two, between guilt and desire, between loyalty to a man who barely knew me and a hunger to be wanted again. I told myself I could stop it, that I was still in control. But the truth was, I had already fallen. Still, fear never left me. Not just the fear of being caught, but of what would happen when Aiden's break ended. When he packed his bags and left, would he take this version of me with him, the one he helped awaken? Or would I be left alone again, only this time with a mistake I couldn't take back? His final days at home felt heavier. The silence between us changed. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was guilty, weighted. I saw it in his eyes, the way he looked at me but spoke less. And when he started packing, folding shirts quietly, one after the other, it felt like pieces of my fragile world were falling apart. We had crossed a line. And now, we had to live with it. But what now? We never spoke about what would happen next. He didn't promise anything, and I didn't ask. I didn't want illusions. I'd lived too long wrapped in the comfort of false security, with a husband who barely remembered who I was beyond the woman who kept the house running. But this, what happened between Aiden and me, it was something else. Raw, intense, wrong. but painfully real, and now it had to end. The night before he left, he came to me. For the first time since it all began, he looked uncertain. He didn't reach for me. He just stood there, eyes soft, like he was searching for words he couldn't find. "I don't regret anything," he said quietly. "But I don't want to ruin your life either." I nodded. My throat closed tight. I didn't know if I felt heartbreak or relief. Maybe both. And when he left the next morning, I stood at the door like a stranger watching someone disappear, not with a goodbye, not with a promise. Just silence. Just absence. The house returned to its stillness. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was cold. Days passed. My husband returned. He walked through the door smiling, talking about meetings, tossing souvenirs on the table like they were enough. He never noticed the way I avoided his eyes. Never noticed the pieces of me missing. I had given myself away, emotionally, physically, and somehow, only I could feel it. At first, I thought guilt would eat me alive. But it didn't. What I felt instead was sorrow. An aching sadness for what I had done, yes, but even more for the years I had wasted. For the parts of me I had silenced just to be someone's afterthought. The real betrayal wasn't in the kiss or the touch. It was in the truth that someone who wasn't supposed to matter had seen me, really seen me, in a week more clearly than the man I married had in a lifetime. Aiden texted me once. Just 5 words. "Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself." I stared at the message for hours before finally deleting it. Not because I was angry, but because I knew it had to end. I knew we couldn't go on. But I also knew something else just as clearly: I couldn't go back to who I was before. That version of me, the one who smiled quietly and lived in the background, no longer existed. I had changed, and that change wasn't something I could undo. In the end, my marriage remained, on paper, in name, but it was only a shell. A performance we both unknowingly played. He thought everything was fine. He smiled, he slept beside me, he talked about the future. And I listened, nodded, pretended. But inside, I carried the weight of choices I could never take back. And maybe that's the real punishment: not being caught, not scandal or shame. But waking up every day beside someone who never noticed you were breaking. Living with the truth in silence. I learned something I wish I hadn't. That love without attention is just habit. And attention without commitment is just temptation. And somewhere in between, I lost a version of myself I'll never get back. Life doesn't always break loudly. Sometimes, it shifts quietly, through a look, a conversation, or a moment you never expected. This story isn't about justification. It's about reflection, about how far someone can drift from themselves before they realize they're lost. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal and emotional story. If it made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, consider following the channel for more raw, honest life stories. Your support keeps these voices heard. Disclaimer: this story is a dramatized account inspired by real-life emotions and circumstances. Names, relationships, and events have been altered to protect privacy. It is intended for mature audiences and not meant to encourage or endorse infidelity or inappropriate relationships.